Greetings, intellectual viewers, and welcome to another episode of Roll Off a Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Zendexor, and my teammates are Nikita Zuev and XJ. Frequently on these podcasts, we begin the discussion with references to one of the minor stories which appear in the heyday of the classic magazine Weird Tales. And we use that example as a springboard to explore more territory in literature's infinite web by means of various comparisons and associations of ideas. Today, in one such case, we shall begin with a focus on a story by one Francis G. Grierson entitled The Case of the Golden Lily. It's very short, and the plot is a simple account of attempted murder motivated by jealousy. The intended victim, Miss Carol Spring, is a young and beautiful dancer engaged to an aristocrat named Lord Oakhy. Her performance at the Quality Theatre routinely finishes with a climax whereby she lifts to her face a golden lily, in the centre of which is a globe connected to a power source by an electric wire. She presses a spring, and the globe lights up the lily, suffusing her face with a rose pink glow. But on the last night, just before she is due to abandon the stage and marry Lord Oakhy, when she presses the switch, there is a blinding flash and the globe explodes. The only thing that saves her from being killed or blinded is that instead of holding the lily to her face as usual, on this final performance, she holds it out to her fiancé in the audience. She therefore merely faints from shock. Now the case is taken up by a detective friend of Lord Oakhy, a millionaire and amateur criminologist, as he's referred to, calling himself by the pseudonym Paul Pry. He soon discovers, using whatever mixture of deduction and questioning is not quite clear, that the crime was thought up by a rival of the dancer, a Madame Nadia, and her lover Crawdell, the stage manager, who connected the Golden Lily's modest voltage to the much greater power source running the stage lights. Scotland Yard is then brought in, and that really is all. A couple of remarks before I hand over to my colleagues. The part played by electricity in the story's climax was, of course, much more impressive in the 1920s than it is now, but that need not lessen our regard for the tale. It can, on the contrary, add an extra historical dimension to it. For instance, the fact that this attempted murder mystery appears in a magazine mostly devoted to the supernatural is quite a telling point as far as the mood of the thing is concerned. It's as though electricity almost is supernatural. However, in my view, the principal merit of Grierson's writing is simply that he knows how to tell an extremely short story with some elegance and a concern for the characters, which communicated itself to me when I was reading it. And now over to you, fellas. Nikki, what have you got to say?
Yeah, so the case of the Golden Lily is a very short story. It's shorter than I think most tales that we have done, except for maybe my own, the Clock story, right? I think that's probably the shortest one we ever did. Maybe the Telltale Heart is a shorter, but I'm not sure. But irregardless, it's the shortest tale with some sort of attempt to have a narrative. So for that, I really commend it. I find that the premise itself is fine. I like the way the dancing is described at the beginning. I also find the actual revelation quite intriguing, the way it's written. But I do feel like the story would benefit a lot from restructuring and redefining perspective. I'll talk about that more after we hear what X-Ray has to say. But uh, in short, I think it's a very promising third draft of the story. I think it does need a little bit more in the cooker. You know, it's a little bit raw. But the fact that it goes through the entirety of the tale so quickly and so seamlessly when it comes to details, right? It doesn't feel like any details are sort of unresolved or not shown, is commendable. So for that, it gets high praises from me. On the other hand, the narrative voice, I think, is lacking a little in this tale. Although it has a strong beginning uh, when it comes to telling the story on its own, I think it really slows down in the middle and kind of meanders there where we go into the past as to what's going on. Because if I'm very honest with you, I think we've all figured out what's going on before the big flashback to how these people met. I think these people meeting and the way they fell in love and so on and so forth, that first time that she goes on the stage, could either be told differently or not be told at all. Then you could either spare even more time and have the story be even shorter, or use that space for something more in capturing, right? So I guess that's kind of my feedback as a whole before I go full Frankenstein, uh, you know, surgeon operational table on it. How I would do things differently, right? Actually,
Um, for a Walmart Sherlock Holmes, it's actually pretty good.
Walmart Sherlock Holmes. That's pretty good. Walmart is like Tesco,
Yeah,
Robert, but I'm sure you know.
yeah. So it's actually pretty good for a Walmart version of Sherlock Holmes. I thought, particularly because the it is so short. Um, like in with such a length, the author really has to decide what to cut and what to write and what not to write, like what to leave behind on the cutting board. And it would be so the pacing of the story was one thing that I felt that I agree with Nikki on, like the flashback of how they met. But then at the same time, cutting that out would have meant less character development. Now we could argue what better to put in that spot to develop the characters, but in such a short span of time to make people care about the characters is very, very hard to and to the point where I think and is that the story has no choice but to make the characters a little bit of caricatures. They are very archetypal. Um, you have the sweet innocent girl, and then you have the jealous older woman, and they play their part with such with like such cardboard purity. Like they are so pure to that archetype. There's like no nuance to what they play. And then you have the daddy long legs Sherlock Holmes, uh what's his name, Perry Pry or something like that, uh
Paul.
Paul Pry, the mysterious millionaire benefactor. It's like the archetypes just write themselves, and then the ardent suitor kind of reminds me of Bassanio from Merchant of Venice, whom I hate with a passion. empty of anything except that he's young, rich, and basically the tall, good-looking guy as eye candy, I suppose. But and also the length really stifles a lot of ways in which this story could have been written. For one thing, as a Sherlock Holmes story, it is a type of story. It is a bit criminal to be able to spot the culprit from a mile away. It's like the minute he sat down and described the Russian woman, Nadia, whatever her name is, you know that's the woman that did it. It's I as a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes, I do feel that you have to take some pains to make it unclear who the culprit is, unless there's a really good reason to reveal who he is right from the start. However, it is very hard to do so in 5 pages, so I gotta give the author that. Yeah. And the electricity part, the note that Robert gave about the electricity thing was also something I picked up. It's like, you're not gonna get an explosion from a prop unless it's connected to a main. Like, it's almost certainly battery powered. The glow, I find it difficult to believe that it would explode like that. So there is a bit of a exaggeration of electricity there, which I think Robert had a very good point on, which is that at that time, electricity is kind of like this mysterious force.
I mean, I think you could rig something up where you send way too much volt into it and it just explodes, right? Like into a light bulb, for example.
I mean, I could be being very unfair here, in the sense that the technology for batteries could be very crude back then and a lot more dangerous than it is now. That could be a thing. The thing is, though, is that I don't see. I mean, in order to explode like that, you basically had to plug it into a main, and which means, like in a dance, that flower has to be wired to something. That's not going to give her a lot of freedom of movement, but that's like a minor detail thing, I suppose. Overall, again, like I said, as a Walmart Sherlock Holmes, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could also figure out who the antagonist was from a mile away as soon as they mentioned her nationality. I was like, all right, that's the villain.
Man. There is that too. It's like, oh my god, can you be any less stereotypical, please?
But so it is what it is. And I think, let me put it this way. For what it had and what it was able to accomplish, it is a worthwhile read for anyone who aspires to be an author. Because there's a lot of things that this author does right. There's things that he focuses on to make sure that you get as much out of the story as possible. Excuse me. And I think, really, with a premise like this, there's a lot of golden opportunities to do something interesting with the tale. So I would say that if you wanted to try your hand at a first-time story, sending yourself into a situation where there's a mystery and the mystery has to unfold and the audience has to guess as to what has transpired, and then you have to give them an answer, this is a pretty good attempt at that, right? Um, Here's the things I would change, though. If I was the author, I would start with the incident already sort of either happening, or do a bit of a flashback into the incident as we are in the aftermath. So the way I'd start it is like the detective is on the stage, he's looking at the girl, she's like on the ground there, he's calling for a medic, right? And immediately you, the reader, are like, oh, something happened. This dancer's on the ground, the golden lily is in her hand. It's, the
Mm.
the wheels are turning, the thing has begun, the chase is on, right? And then this guy explains that, like, the detective go within his mind, he starts going through what's been happening recently, how this woman was about to marry somebody, and he doesn't know what's gonna happen to her now. And also, the way I would end the first 2 or 3 paragraphs is, and he was sure that this was no accident, right? So, and then you could have him do a little bit more investigative work of being like, okay, so who has she been hanging out with? Who's responsible for the lighting, and so on and so forth, right? And then get to the end, where he figured everybody out. I think that would make the story a lot stronger if you started with the inciting incident and were following an actual investigation, um, through which you could learn all this backstory that we saw, um, being showcased in front of us.
Mm.
I think it's the biggest issue for me, that both the resolution and the actual crime happen at the end of the story. So we spend literally almost no time on the mystery and on the actual crime, right?
Mm.
I like
Mm.
your amendment, Nikki, because one of the things about writing a story that's like so short is you have to be very creative about how you structure the story. Like a story that starts from the beginning, has a middle and an end, typically would need more time, more space, more pages. You have to,
Mhm.
you do have to maybe not start from the beginning if you're only writing like less than 5 pages, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, basically less than 5 pages.
Mm. Yeah.
What about you, gentlemen? What amendments or what things would you try to insert into this narrative in order to enhance it, knowing that you still have to have only 5 pages?
Well, I've got a suggestion. If we're considering it primarily as a mystery story, which it's supposed to be,
Right. I
although
mean, it's called the case of, right? Like that's
yes,
as
yeah,
mystery as
yeah,
you can get.
and I quite like it actually as a just as a story. Never mind the mystery, but supposing it is a mystery story, then the author throws away some opportunity of mystery mongering by explaining right quite early on that the father of Lord Oakhy was reconciled to the idea of him marrying um, Miss Spring. Whereas if you did it differently, the father could be one of the suspects because it could be hinted that he really didn't want his son to marry this mere dancer, and you could lead the audience up that track for quite a while before you then finally reveal that, of course, it was the Russian lady who did it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Here you go. We're gonna blend our two ideas together here, Robert. So we make it that it is well known that this father guy hasn't been really happy with all this situation, and he owns the electrical company. He owns the So we make it so that he owns the electrical grid in this area, right? And not only that,
Mm.
but we also make it so that the head electrician wasn't here last month to do all the checkups. So now you're like, oh, okay, well, this is a pretty done deal until you learn that, you know, like that the father is here and he's really worried and he's brought the family doctor to look after this girl. And then the detective's like, okay, well, he wouldn't be bringing, like, this is way too much, right? Like he's just arrived on the scene without even me sort of getting him there, so it has to be somebody else. And then he continues on moving, and then he recognizes that this is a good clue that this head this head electrician wasn't here last month, but it's got to do something else entirely, because he got paid off to not be there. By whom? And then, you know, that's where he leads you to the actual culprits. Right, and I think you could get that done in 5 pages.
That's assuming we're making a sort of whodunit mystery out of it. There's another kind of detective story which I also very much like, which is not so much a whodunit, but the rarer form of, we know who did it, but how on earth was it done? And there's two really good examples of that in the literature. There's Francis Isles' book Malice Aforethought, which is actually told from the point of view of the murderer, and you read the entire book thinking, how is this guy going to be brought to book? And it only happens right at the end that you realize how it's going to happen. And Dorothy Sayers' Peter Wimsey mystery Unnatural Death, which is blindingly obvious who did it, but again, we can't understand how on earth the murderer was able to do what she did. So you could leave it obvious from the start that Nadia was responsible, but somehow try and make a mystery out of how it was done. But that's going to be more difficult because, you know, we aren't mystified by electricity in the same way that people used to be. Well, actually, I'm still pretty mystified about it, but never mind. But anyway, it's another approach. It's a different approach. I like the story as it was because I just like reading stories. I like reading about people, and I don't really mind so much about the structure as long as you know, as long as it's not too disgusting, which this one isn't.
Fair enough. What about you, actually? Anything to add? Any ideas you'd put into your case of the Golden Lily?
Well, I think if I were the one writing this, my approach would have been to scale back on the character building and a little bit more on the mystery building, but then it would have hit a different kind of audience, I suppose. So it's not so much improvement, but more like just the way I would do it. I would give a little bit more to how Mr. Pry, Paul Pry, solved the mystery. Other than just like a couple of looks at each other between the doctor and Mr. Pry, and then they just arrive at the conclusion and then tell us what it is. I would have structured the mystery a little bit more, I suppose. Give it a more sleuthy feel to the whole thing. But again, it's very tough. It's like less than 5 pages, man. You really got to decide what you want to focus on, and the author tried to hit a balance of both, and I don't think it's a bad decision to make. It is a decent enough read for what it is. So not really a suggestion on how to improve it, more like this is how I would have written it.
That's fair. I think for me, if I was trying to write it and I didn't go with the approach that I already mentioned, which is like, you know, starting from the fact that the crime has happened, I guess I would, if I were to do it exactly like the author did, aka spend more time on the characters and stuff. I would spend more time with Carol, actually, because Carol, she's kind of a, she's not really a character, so to speak. Like she dances really well. That's kind of it, right? We don't really get to learn much about her, but the crime is against her. So I would actually, I would make it interesting in the case of like, right. So how do we make this girl both likable but also really obnoxious? Where you would get the feeling of like, yeah, okay, I get it why people want to blow up like a flower in her face, right? So I would spend more time on that, sort of kind of making her endearing, but at the same time, you kind of get it. You're like, oh, okay, she really should shut her mouth sometimes and stop being so glittery and happy about everything, because she's just annoying everybody with her energy. I'd do something like that, right? Or even the reverse. I might make her the villain in the sense of like, yeah, she's like pretty terrible and she doesn't deserve the things that are coming to her. She's just like talented and beautiful, and she's making everyone's else's life miserable. So the fact that the quote unquote villains get put to jail, you're like, ah, that
I
sucks, man.
mean,
I wish they should have.
one very common line that who done it type of story like this is that the victim is also the person who done it. So yeah.
Okay, that's a little different from what I was going for, but that
Yeah, I
is
mean, it's like, yeah, I get it. It's just that I was just like continuing my thought on how it's like you should not make it so obvious who the bad guy was unless you're writing a how done it story.
yeah. All right. Otherwise, as I said before, I really stand by this thought. I think that this is a good study for those who want to write a story, because I think it's good enough, right? Like it got published. So obviously, enough people thought to themselves, okay, we can print this on a piece of paper, right? But it is also not as challenging. Like it doesn't go into great strafes to make this the mystery really engaging or anything like that. It's just good. It's good enough. Let's put it that way. So if you try and go for the standard of like, how do I write something and improve on it, I think the case of the Golden Lily is a good study for that. You could really dissect it, and if you can see ways that you could make it better, then you would probably write a better story than it. There we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's all I've got to say.
I think the last thing I would add is it feels, I'm totally guessing here, it feels like Paul Pry could be a recurring character within the author's imagination anyway, even if Paul Pry never got his day in print other than this story.
I will research that and I'll let you know.
Seems
Yeah,
like
he really does come across like a Sherlock Holmes kind of character.
The snippet that we all read together, The Case of the Golden Lily, it says actually that there's a different story made by the same author that is coming in the next issue. So maybe it has Paul Pry in it. Who knows?
Yeah, could be because the setup for Paul Pry does make it sound like he's going to be Sherlock Holmes or what's his name,
Poirot.
Poirot. Yeah, kind of person. Yeah. All right. Well, do we have anything else to say about this very, very short story?
I'd give it a solid 6.5 out of 10.
Rob?
Yeah, I think I would as well. Actually, I quite like the look of that number 6.5.
Yeah, it's above average, but it's not that above average.
I'll give it a 7 just because of how difficult it is to write a story like this in less than 5 pages. Yeah.
That's quite generous.
Mostly for effort, you could say. And it didn't turn out bad. It's just suffers a lot from being so short, which is not something that's always in our control. Yeah. All right, I suppose that wraps up the case of the Golden Lily.
There we go. Listeners, thank you so much for coming. If you enjoyed the tale that we spoke about, this is another one that's readily available on demand. You can go and read it for yourself. The next story by Francis D. Grierson is called The Iron Room, and I'm gonna read it personally. And if it's good enough, I might tell my colleagues that we should review it. But there you go. Please like and subscribe, and have a fantastic day, dear
Yes.
listeners.
If you like and subscribe, if you give us a like and subscribe, something nice will happen. I'm sure of it.
That's right. That's right. We will solve the case of the Golden Lily.
All right, guys. Take care.